Well, why don't we start by actually hearing some of the stories that you've been sharing with each other in response to the last session. I've heard about 3, just people quietly coming up to me and then saying, no, I don't want to share to everybody. So I will pick on them if others aren't forthcoming. But Richard, you're going to kick us off, aren't you? And why don't you take the mic, come up here and take the mic so viewers at home don't miss out.
Oh gosh, I feel like I actually have to say something meaningful. So we were discussing initially on the first question, obviously where our common experiences were. And actually, one of the things that came up was that often, whilst we have common experiences in terms of our humanity, our faith is often that bit that sort of divides us. But it was actually, we decided in the end, it was our humanity which was our common experience, just being ourselves and opening ourselves up and making ourselves vulnerable in front of other people, which made them trust us, which sort of made us acceptable to them, and so they felt safe to share with us as well. And in that sharing, that we kind of shared our stories together, that they also listened and we listened, and that backwards and forwards. And the second question was what? What was that? Ah, yes, the things that returned to us. Now, it was an interesting one because we actually were sort of struggling with what does that mean? What does that look like? And I think in the end, we decided it was the moments where, when we're talking to someone, when we experience a conversation with someone else, or we listen to them, or something happens, it's when the Spirit works in us as well, and we can sort of see and experience God in that situation, where it's playing out inside us. I feel, someone jump in here if I'm making no sense at all from my group, because I feel they were more eloquent on this one than I am being. So I think that sums it up, I hope.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, who's next?
We were group 1, so I suppose we ought to go. So very, very briefly, 2 things sprung to mind for us. One was this concept of brief encounters, and one of our group who works in the town centre chaplaincy in Taunton was really struck by the fact that you don't know how long your encounter with somebody is going to be, but it may have lasting repercussions, and told a story about how somebody had come back to them years later for some work that they'd done in a previous part of their ministry and said, oh, I remember when you taught us the Lord's Prayer in primary school, and they were really really touched by that, and that really struck me. The second thing that struck me as facilitator was when somebody talked about when you're in a hospice situation or in a hospital situation, actually just getting alongside somebody and spending time with them is possibly one of the most precious things you can do. Frankly, that they have got time to spend with you, and we have to make time to spend with them. And I think the reason why that struck me is because I work in a school where everything's so timetabled and there isn't even time to breathe, let alone grab a quick coffee at break time and get back to the next thing. And actually, time is so precious, isn't it? And I just thought to myself, note to self, try and go back to school and operate out of timetable, but in time. I think that was my thoughts. There we are.
Thank you. Yes, great.
Thank you. So we had a good moment with Group 3. We had a good moment when we met together from different walks of life and were sharing stories. And one of our numbers said, hang on a minute, are we answering the question? And we realised we were, and one of the things was the direction of travel for all of us. And that is that in church ministry, people come to the church to find help or to see the rector or whatever, and they come to us and say, knock on the door. Whereas for all of us in our different roles as chaplains, we travel out from our churches to that place, wherever that is, alongside them. It can be quite lonely, but the direction of travel means that we place ourselves alongside the people who we meet and much more share stories. So in sharing a story, in fact, we're sharing part of our journey. Group 3, is that all right?
That's fantastic. Yeah.
May I just have something to that?
Definitely.
I visited Nigel and Karen and team just a few days ago, and one of the things that I learnt and realised as somebody who loves to run is that Nigel said, well, I walked slowly up and down the parade in Bath, and actually takes an age, not least because of the number of people who smile at him and want to say hello and chat. To get from one end of the parade at Bath University to another takes a while. but he's out there and his team are out there walking slowly. And that really makes a difference in being available, smiling, greeting, to have conversations.
That's great, thanks. I mean, can I just interject here that there's something quite deliberate about what I asked you to focus on here in answering these questions, and you are getting to that, and that is this understanding that we aren't just there to serve people. We're not there to save and serve. We're there to receive other people's gifts as well. And so, and that's why I've asked you to kind of consider this. And I think it's wonderful the way that's being heard. Did somebody want to come up? Yeah, Gordon, come. Thank you.
Group 10 didn't really have a convener to start with. None of us wanted to do it. And then the lady who really became the convener then told us off for not really getting to the question. So then we kind of concentrated a lot more. I'm just trying to think when it was. There was a BBC4 programme not that long ago on the great tsunami that hit the North Somerset coast in about 16, and I'm desperately trying to think of the date. It was either 06 or 36, I can't remember. If any geologists here, they'll know it much better than I do. And the programme looked at the evidence, including the documentary evidence, from several parishes on the North Somerset coast. And there was a letter from a lady in that parish who lost her entire family in this flood, saying what had she done to upset God so much that he had visited this upon them all. We didn't talk about that in Group 10, but what we did talk about was doubt and the fact that what can you attribute to God? And in that sense, that is a huge overlapping experience for me. And I was talking about a hospice encounter with a lady whose funeral, and she was still alive at that point, but she wanted me to take her funeral, and she said yes. She was very determined that I would, but there was a condition, and the condition was that I did not say anything to her about this being part of God's plan. And I have wrestled with the theology of that ever since, and it seems to me that the most powerful thing I have shared with so many people is doubt about what God does and doesn't do, what God leaves us to do, and what freedoms we've been given to make our way in this world. And I think that for many chaplains, certainly in schools, is a really serious issue. Thank you.
Marlene, could you come and share your story you were telling me? Because that was wonderful. Come up here. No, come on. You say it better.
Some of you may remember a program, I think it was a BBC program, a couple of years ago, talking about the UK being, I think they said, the European capital of loneliness, where there are many people who are lonely, young people, old people, well-off people. It wasn't, their financial situation, but they just found themselves on their own. And my husband and I watched that and felt quite upset that this was happening, and we are both retired, and we thought, well, we'd love to do something about this, but we weren't sure how to start. So I happened to mention to our vicar, Rod Cork, St. Mary Magdalene in Taunton, how we felt. And he said, well, why don't you do something in the coffee shop area of the church? So this was April of last year. And we started a little, very simple get-together in the afternoon, playing board games. But the board games is really just to break the ice. So it's just for people to have a chat with each other. They can do colouring if they wish, or knitting, or anything, just for a bit of company. So we've been going for over a year now, and everybody who comes seems to come again. And sometimes we have people who are visiting the town. They just pop in, and we show them hospitality, and then they carry on. but it's a lovely thing to do. Just spend some time together. And many of them don't go to church, and but God is there.
Yeah, fantastic. Reminds me of the guy in Denmark who began that chain of shops, Tiger. I don't know if you've seen that, but he started this initiative in a city in Denmark where everyone would be invited to this big hall for a communal meal once a week. You know, families and everyone of all generations. And the Scandinavians are so good at doing intergenerational in a way that we're not so much. But isn't that just a wonderful idea? You know, bring your food, massive table. Everyone knows that once a week they're going to have a proper, you know, communal meal time together. Okay, who's next? Which groups have we heard from so far? One? 3, 6, 10. 4. Let's have 4. Great. And you're 7, are you? You're 2 and you're 7. Okay, we'll have you next. Thanks.
Some of our group were planning to go into chaplaincy, and so the rest of us shared some very precious stories of chaplaincy. We talked about being salt and light in those in our places of chaplaincy. We talked about the importance really of building trust in our places of chaplaincy. Talked about building of having an aura about us as well, and being aware that folk do look to us to show a Christian example as well. Yeah, that was quite important as well. And we didn't get to question 2.
Right, would you like to come up? And then, okay, Philip first, and then we'll... And then go to the next. Okay.
I think from our group, a key word was vulnerability. The integrity of vulnerability, which isn't always easy to achieve when perhaps you're working for an institution which is, which prizes its impressiveness, beyond everything else. Big shiny organisations which find it very difficult to admit to any degree of fault or any kind of failure. And so when you're, I think you spoke of these kind of secular organisations which I mean, the line that came to me was Prospero's line in Shakespeare's Tempest. This thing of darkness, I acknowledge mine. Very difficult for organisations to admit to any difficulty or fault. Certainly in their marketing pages. And there you are working in that kind of organisation. How can you show? How do you end up not reflecting the objectives of the institution and actually get alongside people in their vulnerability and reflect them? Again, the Etty Hilsum line, I think, about reflecting those concerns that people have. The feedback that you've given has reminded me of a line that Dag Hammarskjöld, the UN Secretary General to the UN, said. He said something like, if you learn your theology before you learn your humanity, you'll never learn your humanity. And I think there's a lot of truth in that. So I'm trying to learn a bit of humanity at the moment, Do encourage me, please.
Thank you, that's wonderful.
Humanity, Which organisation is it, Philip? Which organisation?
You're not on camera. Yeah, definitely. You were off mic when you said that, by the
way. We were a very small group, and so we stole one from another group to make our group a little bigger. I think the first question, really, the overlap we came through, people shared their stories, and what was so key was the journeys of life experience that they had before becoming a chaplain was what actually helped form them. And so, for example, the person who had experience of travelling and working alongside travellers brought all that amazing knowledge and skill base with them to that. And that's, I couldn't walk into those shoes. But I bring with me, as an educationalist, all my experience of not only being a child and still being a child, but also being a teacher and having been a senior leader in a school, so that actually I can get alongside people and talk with people, but also they're willing to come and share with you. And the same in the same group with the other person working in chaplaincy, only one day a week with 15,000 students, those sort of questions about what is it I can do, but I can bring my own experience and I can do what I can in that time. And the other person in our group was working, had actually been a nurse, but didn't say that. And it so showed in the way in which they worked in the hospital that they were working in. I think for us, more than anything, it's about adaptability. You can't go in and really know what the day is going to hold. And so you've got to be flexible and you've got to be willing to change. You've got to be able to change your plans. You've got to be able to meet the needs of different people at different times. But I think the key thing of this experience is that I learned so much from the people that I am with. The 9-year-old girl whose mother was going to die in the next couple of months, that anticipatory grief experience, that journey that we went on together up until the moment her mum died, we didn't know when that was going to be. To this day, I learnt far more from her than she would ever learn from me. And so actually, we can do what we can. We're not perfect. We can walk along those journeys with others. And we don't necessarily know. We can't measure our impact necessarily. We can't put it in a chart. We can't, in the world's institutions that we work in, create these sort of statistics and data about how effective and efficient and all this other stuff is. Because we just be, and we're just there. And it's really important to remind our leaders, be they in education or industry or whatever, that actually we're just there and we're modelling, and we can only do, and we're human and we're not perfect. But actually, for me, I've learnt more about when I got it wrong. So I wasn't a very good deputy head. I did far too many hours. I juggled far too many balls. And I had to get to break point to stop and change direction. But actually, that's the story that I now share with the senior leaders I work with.
Actually, we're not human doings, we're human beings.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, great.
I got volunteered for standing up at 8. There we go. Thank you. Right, so looking at question 1, we looked at our own personal experiences and situations that we've been in that would help us to understand the people that come in and talk to us. And help us to show an empathetic side to us as well, so that we would be able to understand a bit about where those people were coming from. So we felt that was really quite important, but also to feel it was just to be able to just sit, like this lady was just saying, sorry I can't remember your name, but just to, just to actually just be with that person and just be there to listen. So when we looked at the second bit, we talked about vulnerability and loss and loneliness. Some of the people in the group that I was with worked in hospitals and hospices, and one guy had worked in a prison. So it kind of come across people that had just been known because of their illness or because of they had a number or a code that related to them. So there was a sense of loss and vulnerability in that.
Thank you. Okay, fantastic. Is that it? Is everyone else done then?
So I'm going to try to feedback for group 10. There's a wonderful amount of overlap in everything that's been shared so far, as we'd probably expect. But some of the things that came out in terms of question 1 was, again, that all our previous experience, whether it be life experience, work experience, has enabled us to find that overlap with the people that we minister alongside. And again, that sense of actually being deeply human and connecting with each other's humanity is the most important aspect of that. In terms of answering question 2, we reflected on the nature of beingness, the importance of that in terms of returning us to who we are created to be. We also spoke that the place of deep encounter with another also returns us to ourselves. And Judith shared also something which is about modelling, in a sense, God's perspective on us in terms of affirming others in what they do, even when things go wrong, in the same way that God affirms us, that we don't need to be perfect, but we do our best, we try our hardest, and that is good enough. Do you want to say anything more, Judith, on that? Thank you.
Thank you. Group 9 then. The overlaps between our experience of those we minister to and our own, totally agree, life experiences. Although it's useful to just reflect that a workplace changes very rapidly, doesn't it? And even just a few years after retirement, I can see that things have changed. We totally empathise with what Joanna was saying about the work environment today. In fact, in my chaplaincy this week, I was struck by people being haunted by strain, and that is just so sad. Where have we experienced being returned to ourselves? We reflected that God made mankind in his image, and an image often reflects, doesn't it? And words like encouragement, compassion, forgiveness, healing, those are the things that we can all use as ambassadors for Christ in our chaplaincy work. And finally, quite a useful point was made by Judith in our group. We can all empathise with people's strain and problems, but it's also important to affirm people when they have done their best, even if they feel that what they've done is inadequate. So it's a very useful comment, that, I thought. Thank you.
Thank you. That's fantastic. Yeah, of course. Please do.
Although somebody from my group has already spoken.
That's
very briefly.
Yeah. You don't need to stand behind her. Just hold it up.
I'm a primary school chaplain, and on Monday we got the dreaded phone call from Ofsted that they would be with us in less than 24 hours. So I was in school at the time, and they said, Jenny, you better get down to the serious praying. And I said, well, just not me, but, all of us. And during that afternoon, when there was a frenzy of activity, it occurred to me that none of these staff were going to go home this evening, or they would, but very, very late. And into my mind came the Ministry of Hospitality. So I went down to the local shop, I bought bread, cheese, grapes, and 2 large boxes of Heroes, which I took to the staff. And they were so grateful that somebody had actually just considered their bodily needs. And I just thought, well, we're all talking about people's spiritual needs, but sometimes just the bare practicalities were so appreciated by everybody coming and just picking off a bit of bread, a bit of cheese. And somebody said to me, who doesn't really have a very strong faith, although that sounds very judgmental of me. She said, oh, this is like the loaves and fishes, isn't it? And I thought, well, that's a good comparison to make. But yeah, just sometimes the very practical needs are what we need to be thinking about as a chaplain.
Thank you very much. That's great.